Hold still, I need a clear photo of the bra strap. It's the only way to document a dress code violation.
That's what Clarabeth Norell, enforcement chair of the Redberry Glade HOA, said as she reached for my daughter's back, clipboard in one hand, the other zeroing in like she was tagging contraband. Her voice was sharp and smooth, like she'd done this before, too many times. My daughter, Lyra, froze mid-step at the base of the reflection steps. Her hoodie had slipped slightly to one side after volunteering all morning. Clarabeth saw that inch of black strap and pounced like a vulture with a badge. And then she touched her. She grabbed the strap. I crossed the grass in 5 strides. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't give Clarabeth a chance to justify what she'd just done. Instead, I said, "You touched her for a violation that doesn't exist, and that pole behind you just caught all of it." Clarabeth's smirk faltered. She turned, slow, deliberate, toward the blinking green light of the HOA's new smart safety node installed last month. "These sensors report to the board, not to you." "They do both," I said, "because I built the firmware they never read before installing." That's when her face twitched. If you've ever seen an adult put their hands on a child under the excuse of a rule, subscribe right now. Because what you're about to hear, it doesn't end with an apology. It ends with felony charges and a courtroom full of stunned board members. My name is Rhett Vellin. I'm not just Lyra's father. I'm a forensic ergonomics consultant. I testify in courtrooms about force, range of motion, proximity, and defensive postures. Lawyers call me when they need to prove how much pressure cracked a rib, or whether a touch was accidental, or deliberate. Clarabeth didn't know any of that. She saw a teenage girl, saw a slightly exposed strap, and she thought that gave her license to grab. But what she really grabbed was evidence. The reflection steps weren't just a path in Redberry Glade. They were sacred to us. It's where Lyra learned to ride her scooter when we first moved in. Where my late wife, Marin, scattered wildflower seeds and planned community cleanups before the illness took her. It was where we said goodbye to her. Lyra, in a white dress, clutching my hand, trying not to cry as the ashes scattered into the pond mist. We walked this trail every Sunday. Always stopped here. Marin's bench plaque was right behind Lyra when Clarabeth grabbed her. And the outfit? Lyra had just finished a 3-hour cleanup shift. She wore a navy cleanup vest over a black tank, hoodie on top. She'd bent down to tie a trash bag when Clarabeth swooped in with her clipboard. "She's non-compliant," Clarabeth said, loud enough for the other teens nearby to hear. "Dress code violation per HOA Resolution 3B. I knew that clause. Knew it didn't pass the board vote in 2016. Knew it had no legal standing. But she said it anyway, banking on fear and obedience. And Lyra, she flinched. She backed up, dropped her phone. Her lip trembled like she was bracing for detention. "I'll be submitting this to the board," Clarabeth continued, not even looking at Lyra. "And if she resists again, I'll escalate to a fine." "You won't," I said. "You won't do anything but walk away and pray my sister doesn't press charges before midnight." Clarabeth turned fully now, lips curling. "And your sister would be who, exactly?" I met her gaze. "Callan Vellin, District Attorney, Jefferson County." That landed. Hard. Clarabeth's clipboard dipped a 1/4 inch. Her smile didn't return. "I suggest you get your daughter in compliance, Mr. Vellin," she said through clenched teeth. "And I suggest," I replied, tapping the blinking green node behind her, "you start prepping for a subpoena." Lyra was shaking, not crying, not speaking, just standing small under the weight of it all. I put my arm around her shoulder and steered us away from the stairs, away from the bench, but not away from what came next. Clarabeth grabbed the wrong strap, and the Wright family saw her do it. Clarabeth didn't call it what it was. She never said assault, never admitted she'd grabbed a teenage girl's bra strap under the pretense of a dress code violation. She called it a visual verification. Wrote it in her clipboard with that ugly blue pen like it was policy. Like Lyra was a sidewalk weed to be trimmed for uniformity. We made it home without speaking. Lyra went straight to her room and shut the door behind her. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. That was the moment the rage stopped burning hot and turned cold. I walked into my office and pulled up the surveillance node feed. The HOA's smart safety pole had been blinking green when Clarabeth made contact, which meant the motion and audio subroutines had triggered. The stream had already hit my sandbox instance, where my automated parser stored the footage with timestamps, temperature deltas, and decibel spikes. I opened the clip. It was short, 17 seconds from Clarabeth's first approach to my arrival, her hand clearly visible, fingers curling under Lyra's cardigan collar, lifting the black strap. Lyra's back arches away, Clarabeth's voice clear as day. "Just hold still. This is standard procedure." Standard for what? Mugshots? I sent the clip to an isolated folder labeled Violation A and saved it to an encrypted drive. Then I logged into the HOA portal. Resolution 3B didn't exist, at least not publicly. The latest posted bylaws were dated 2019. No amendments, no votes, no addenda referencing anything about minor appearance enforcement. There was a vague neighborhood presentation policy with bullet points about lawn decor and flag displays, but nothing about undergarments, straps, or visual checks on children. I wasn't surprised. Clarabeth's entire role was built on smoke, drafted resolutions, unofficial walkthroughs, citations backed by confidence rather than consensus. But now she'd escalated from intimidation to physical contact, and I had the proof. I heard the soft sound of Lyra's door unlock, but she didn't come out. I waited. Then her voice came through the crack. She didn't even ask me first. I walked over, rested my hand on the other side of the door frame. "She didn't have the right to touch you at all." She looked at me like I was trash, she said, like I broke something just by existing. My chest felt like concrete. I hadn't seen her cry at the funeral, not even when the urn slipped in my hands as I knelt by the pond. But this? A stranger grabbing her on a Sunday morning? That's what cracked her. I couldn't let it stand. Not for Lyra, not for Marin, not for any other kid who walked those steps next week. The next morning, a crisp letter appeared in our mailbox, hand-delivered and stamped with the HOA seal. Citation for violation of community appearance. Resolution 3B, subject, Lyra Vellin. Details, non-compliant upperwear. Detected during community patrol photographic evidence on file, no signature, no timestamp. Just a copy of a policy that didn't exist. I scanned the header. The formatting was off. The footer contained a mismatch in page number syntax, suggesting it had been copied from another form. Probably an old landscaping fine. I printed it out anyway. It would be Exhibit 2. Later that day, I took a walk around the block. Just to think. Just to breathe. The sky was gray but not heavy. A pair of joggers passed by without looking up. Outside the community clubhouse, I spotted Torin Micel, clipboard in hand, same khakis he always wore, updating a list of repair requests near the mailbox pavilion. He'd been on the HOA compliance team for years, but never raised his voice once. The quiet type. The kind of man who believed in systems, even when they were run by bullies. He looked up, met my eyes, then immediately looked back down at his checklist. He knew. I didn't confront him, not yet. But I made a mental note of the way he lingered outside the HOA meeting room as Clarabeth's voice rang out from inside. Something about new motion standards and non-compliance escalation. She was doubling down. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about Lyra. Clarabeth wasn't targeting individuals. She was executing an entire framework of control, one girl at a time. She'd built an invisible rulebook, and she was enforcing it with her hands. So I went home, lit a single candle on the edge of Marin's bench, and clicked the record button on my private server. I wasn't going to the board. I was going to war. Torin Micel didn't knock when he passed my driveway that Tuesday morning. He didn't wave either, just adjusted the strap on his clipboard and kept walking like he always did. Quiet, small steps, one eye on the sidewalk cracks. But something in his shoulders gave him away. Guilt rides the spine like weight. I watched from the porch, still holding my coffee. Clarabeth had called a compliance assembly for the coming Thursday, whatever that meant, and flyers had started appearing on mailboxes, taped crooked with Redberry Glade's outdated HOA seal. It wasn't an official seal anymore. The board changed it in 2018, but Clarabeth still used the old one, because fear ages well when it looks official. Lyra hadn't left her room much since Sunday. I didn't press her, but her earbuds were in and her sketchbook was out. That was good. Her hands needed movement, and mine needed targets. I waited until just after noon to show up at the clubhouse. Figured Torin would be there. He usually handled maintenance requests during the midday lull. Sure enough, he was hunched over the printer near the back office, feeding new toner into a machine older than most of the kids who lived here. "Torin," I said. He jumped. Not much, but enough to knock the extra cartridge off the desk. "Rhett," he muttered, picking it up. "Didn't hear you come in." "Not looking for small talk," I said. "Looking for honesty." He didn't look up, just opened a drawer and fiddled with paper clips that didn't need organizing. "Clarabeth says you helped file Resolution 3B, I continued, the one she cited when she laid hands on my daughter. Torin's fingers went still. "I've been through every published bylaw from the last 8 years, I said. Every digital vote log, every minute's archive. 3B doesn't exist. He exhaled, slow, like he'd been holding that breath since the weekend. "It was a draft," he finally said. 2016, proposed, rejected. "How rejected?" I asked. "Close vote? 6-1. President at the time called it blatantly inappropriate. Marked it with a black line and everything. Wasn't even supposed to be revisited. But Clarabeth kept it. She kept a lot of things," Torin said. "Old drafts, abandoned notes, unfiled proposals. She keeps a binder of them, pretends they're active. Does the rest of the board know?" He hesitated. "Some suspect, but no one's challenged her formally. She's persuasive." I stared at him. "You knew she used that draft to issue citations?" He nodded once. "I never signed them." "But you printed them." Another pause. "She'd have done it with or without me. I just didn't want to be next on her list." His voice cracked a little there. Not fear, regret. "I'm not asking you to testify," I said. "Not yet. I'm asking you to give me what she's using." His eyes flicked to the hallway. The clubhouse was quiet. Outside, wind brushed against the building, rattling the vent slats. Then, slowly, Torin reached into the lower cabinet and pulled out a battered file folder, red tape down one side. No official label. He handed it over without a word. Inside was a single printed page. Resolution 3B, Minor Appearance Enforcement Clause. No board vote, no timestamp, no quorum record. Just a line at the bottom in red pen. Pending ratification, discretion permitted for pilot enforcement. I recognized the handwriting. Clarabeth's. "You kept this?" I asked. "Because I knew someone would need it one day." That day was now. I left the clubhouse through the back door, folder tucked under my arm like a loaded weapon. The sun was low, turning the pond water gold. The reflection steps sat in the distance, quiet, empty, but not forgotten. When I got home, I scanned the draft, uploaded it to the same folder as the footage, and labeled it Exhibit B. I had the video. Now I had the false policy, 2 puzzle pieces, still incomplete, but enough to open the door. Lyra was sitting on the porch when I got back, hoodie wrapped around her knees, sketchbook resting in her lap. "What if she does it to someone else?" she asked quietly. "She won't," I said. She looked up at me, eyes tired but sharp. "You're sure?" I sat beside her, the folder still warm in my hands. She touched the wrong family. The bulletin went up Wednesday morning, taped to the inside of the glass display case beside the mailbox pavilion, bold red ink at the top. Mandatory compliance evaluation. All minors. Below it, smaller print. Just small enough to require leaning in. Per community guidelines, Resnum 3B, all residents under 18 must comply with decency standards during public movement in shared HOA areas. Spot checks may resume at board discretion. Spot checks. She put it in writing. There was no signature, no date, no board co-approval. Just the initials CN stamped at the bottom with a thick red marker. Clarabeth Norell, doubling down in full view. By noon, I'd already counted 3 parents standing in front of the bulletin board, staring at it like they couldn't quite believe it was real. One of them, a woman I'd only met once in passing, short dark hair, green yoga mat under one arm, snapped a photo and muttered, "She's lost her mind." No one pulled it down, not yet. I took a copy of the notice, scanned it at home, and dropped it into my folder, labeled it Exhibit C. That made 3. Lyra didn't want to walk to the pond that day. She didn't want to go to the corner store. She didn't even want to check the mailbox. She wore a hoodie with the sleeves pulled over her hands, hood up, headphones in. I didn't ask what she was listening to. I didn't have to. I remembered what silence used to sound like before Marin died. And this wasn't it. The afternoon was cold and dry, wind scraping the gutters like claws. I sat in the living room and stared at the files on my screen. Exhibits A through C, video, false resolution, bulletin, evidence in sequence. Still not enough for a case, but enough to start shaking doors. That's when I called Callan. "Tell me everything," she said as soon as she picked up. "From the beginning." So I did. I didn't dramatize it, didn't dress it up. Just gave her the time codes, the policy number, the quote from the bulletin, the draft pulled from Torin's cabinet. And then I sent her the footage. There was a long pause when it finished transferring. "I'm going to ask a question," she said slowly, "and I need you to answer it exactly." "Okay." "Was there any contact between Clarabeth and Lyra's skin?" "Yes, brief but visible." She pulled the cardigan aside and lifted the strap, made full contact with shoulder blade and tank strap. "She say anything before?" "Just, 'Hold still, I need a clear photo.'" Another pause, this one longer. "That's all I need," she said. "I'll call you back tonight." I didn't ask what she was going to do. I didn't need to. I knew my sister. She didn't make noise when she moved. She documented, calculated, cut straight through the center with the weight of statute behind her. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees and the streets turned gray, I stood in the garage and opened the heavy plastic bin where I kept my sight gear. Not old photos, not some dusty binder in the attic. Actual tools, fabric pressure sensors, touch force arrays, temperature-gated thermal pads. I laid the tank top Lyra wore that day on the table and began mapping the contact area. I measured how much force would have been required to lift the strap without slipping, how the motion would have displaced the shoulder blade, where fingerprints might have lingered. I used chalk thread and grid overlays. I aligned it all against the frame-by-frame metadata from the camera node stream. 17 seconds. That's all it took. 17 seconds to shatter the illusion of neighborhood safety. When I walked back inside, Lyra was asleep on the couch, curled in a ball under the Afghan her mom had knitted before the hospital stays started. Her hoodie was still on. Zipper halfway down. She looked smaller than she used to. The house was quiet, and in that silence I opened a new folder and named it what it really was. Case, Redberry v. Norell. Callan called just after midnight. "I've got enough to move," she said, "but I need it clean." Her voice was even, methodical. I could hear papers rustling on her end, and the faint clink of glass against wood. Her desk, not a bar. My sister didn't drink, not since the custody hearings on her first job shook her hard enough to quit even caffeine. When she called at midnight, it meant the law was awake with her. "You're sure you can file?" I asked. "On 2 counts, yes. 1 for unwanted physical contact with a minor, 1 for unauthorized surveillance if she photographed Lyra. But we'll need more than just video. Someone has to verify that Resolution 3B never passed." "I can do that," I said. "No, you need someone from inside." She meant Torin. "I'll ask him." "Be careful," she warned. "If she gets wind that the DA's circling, she'll bury anything that isn't nailed down." She paused. "I've seen women like her, Rhett. Give them a title and a laminated badge, and they become the border patrol of suburbia." "She laid hands on a kid," I said. "The rest is noise." "I'll file a formal complaint by 6 a.m. You'll get a copy by courier. Keep Lyra close tomorrow. Don't let her out of your sight." I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark and reviewed the footage again. Every blink of that green node light, every frame of Clarabeth's fingers pinching the fabric, the audio spike when Lyra gasped. It wasn't violent. That's what made it worse. It was calm, systemic, mechanical. By sunrise, a manila envelope was on my porch. Inside, a copy of the complaint, signed by Callan, stamped and logged. It named Clarabeth Norell in bold at the top, followed by her title, residence, and position on the HOA board. The word battery appeared 5 times. I placed it beside the scanned draft of Resolution 3B, the bulletin, and the video timestamp chart. One by one, the scaffolding of her authority started to shake. Mid-morning, I headed to the clubhouse again. Torin was in the back, logging work orders. His eyes flicked up as I entered, and he closed the binder a little too quickly. "I need you to say it out loud," I told him. "I need you to confirm, in your own words, that Resolution 3B was never approved." He looked down at his clipboard. You know that already. Callan needs it. She's filed. But it won't hold unless someone from the board side confirms the resolution was fake. I'm not bored, he muttered. You're their archivist. I'm a contractor. You manage every bylaw revision, Torin. You have the vote logs. You have the drafts. She used your printer to make a fake law. That makes you a witness whether you want to be or not. He exhaled slowly, eyes closed. For a second, I thought he'd shut down completely. But then he reached into the drawer and pulled out a yellow notepad. He tore off a page, clicked a pen, and started writing. Neat block letters, no hesitation. I, Torin Micelle, confirm that Resolution 3B, Minor Appearance Enforcement Clause, was proposed in 2016 and failed the board vote. No approved version exists. Any citation referencing this clause was made without board consent. He signed it, dated it, handed it to me with both hands. I want no part of the rest, he said. You just had the biggest part, I said. Thank you. When I left, the wind had picked up. The notice on the mailbox board flapped once, the corner loose. It wouldn't last the day, but its damage had already been done. Back home, I scanned the statement and added it to the file. Exhibit D, Internal Witness Verification. The complaint was real. The resolution was fake. The evidence was admissible. The contact was documented. And now the false authority was officially disputed from within. I wasn't just protecting Lyra anymore. I was closing the trap. Clarabeth showed up on our doorstep before I could even close my laptop. It was just past noon. The sunlight was sharp, glassy, like it had teeth. I heard the knock first, 2 rapid taps followed by 1 long pound. When I opened the door, she was standing square in the center of the porch, clipboard in one hand, flyer in the other. You've been contacting city authorities, she said. No greeting, no pretense. Good afternoon, Clarabeth, I replied. Can I help you with something? She pushed the flyer toward my chest. You're disrupting the community's ability to enforce compliance. I'm issuing this as a final notice before penalties escalate. I didn't take the paper, just looked at it. It was the same template as before. Cheap ink, recycled language, inflated with buzzwords like resident decency and collective visual order. But now there was a new section. Failure to comply may result in board-administered consequences. She had underlined consequences 3 times. You're bluffing, I said. Her jaw tightened. I'm documenting resistance. You already documented assault. The words stopped her. I saw it happen, the recognition. She hadn't expected me to say it so plainly. Her mask slipped just a little. I don't know what you think you're doing, Rhett, she said, quieter now, but escalating this is going to make things difficult for your daughter, for you. I stepped fully onto the porch. Listen to me very carefully, I said. You put your hand on my child. You invented a rule to justify it. You've intimidated neighbors into silence, but you made one mistake. She raised an eyebrow, that smug little tick she always used when pretending she had the upper hand. You did it in front of a camera. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she gave a single shallow laugh and turned to leave. Be careful, Mr. Velen, she said over her shoulder. You don't want to make an enemy of the board. I already did, I said, and I filed the paperwork. The door clicked behind me like a gavel. Lyra was upstairs. She hadn't heard the exchange. But I knew the tension had soaked into the walls. This house, our house, was supposed to be a shelter, and now it felt like a pressure cooker. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the manila envelope again. Callan's complaint sat on top. Beneath it, the printouts, Exhibits A through D, the footage, the draft, the bulletin, Torin's handwritten confirmation, a full set, ready. At exactly 2:03 p.m., my phone buzzed. Callan. She took the bait. Sheriff's preparing service. We have the warrant. I stared at the screen for a second, let the words sink in. The warrant. We weren't in warning territory anymore. We were in movement. I texted back. ETA? Callan. Before. Sunrise. You'll be briefed. Don't let her see it coming. I closed the file, sealed it in a labeled folder, and tucked it under the false drawer lining in my desk. Backup copies were already uploaded to 3 cloud vaults, 2 private servers, and an offline USB stored in a locked metal box in the garage. Paranoia? Maybe. but Myron used to say the HOA thrived on neighbors being just uncomfortable enough to stop short of action. That discomfort was their weapon. Mine was precision. At 4 p.m., Lyra came downstairs, hoodie still on, sleeves covering her palms. "Can I go to the pond?" she asked. I paused. "You want me to come?" "No," she said, then softer. I want to sit there, alone, for a minute." I looked through the window. The sun was dipping, but not gone. The wind had calmed. I checked the watch on my wrist, then the line of sight to the reflection steps. "I'll stay by the porch," I said. "You go." She nodded and stepped outside. I watched her make the slow walk down the sidewalk, headphones in, steps even. She moved differently now, not broken, not fragile, but cautious. Like every step was a test of who might stop her next. And then, at the edge of the pond, she sat. The same spot where Marin's bench still overlooked the water, where this all began. I stayed right there, watching, because the storm was almost here. The knock on my door the next morning wasn't from Clarabeth. It was Torin. He stood there with his cap in his hands, the clipboard gone, his knuckles pale around the fabric. I'd never seen him without his uniform khakis before. Today he wore jeans and a jacket too light for the cold. "I changed my mind," he said. "If she's going down, I don't want to be the guy who stayed quiet." I opened the door wider. "Come in." He didn't sit, just stood in the middle of the living room like he was inside a courtroom and didn't know where to face. His eyes kept bouncing to the hallway, like he expected Clarabeth to be hiding behind a coat rack, listening. "She's been doing this for years," he said. "The fake rules, the threats. You're just the first one who didn't fold." I watched him carefully. He looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something too long. "I need something concrete," I said. "Something that proves she's been using unratified policies as legal leverage." Torin reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, neatly creased, yellowed slightly at the edges. "This," he said, "is the original board memo from 2016, after the vote on 3B. It was written by the acting president at the time, Martha Rowe. It says the proposal was rejected and explicitly barred from use unless passed in a future vote, which never happened." He handed it to me, then pulled out his phone. "And this," he said, unlocking it, "is a recording from last week's closed compliance meeting. Clarabeth talking to the committee, telling them 3B was functionally ratified by past practice, and that decency expectations don't need to be formally voted on if they're consistent." He hit play. Clarabeth's voice came through clearly, her cadence clipped and deliberate. "We're not required to re-ratify what has been historically enforced. Residents have complied before. That counts as precedent." Torin's face was still. "She's used that logic to justify every citation she's issued this year," he said. "To fine families, to harass teenagers. I watched her confiscate a volleyball from a group of middle schoolers last month because she said it encouraged unregulated running." I paused the recording. "I can forward the full clip," he said. "Do it, then email me the memo." Torin nodded, but didn't move for a second. Then his eyes drifted toward the hallway again. "Is Lyra okay?" he asked. "She's quiet," I said, "but not broken." He nodded again. "Good." I walked him out, made sure the files arrived in my inbox, then backed them up twice before labeling them Exhibits E and F. One was a written instruction to bury a failed vote. The other was her voice, admitting to manipulating enforcement policy. By noon, Callan had them both. "That's enough," she texted. "I've sent the affidavit to Judge Bramley. Warrants are greenlit." I stood at the edge of the porch and let the wind hit me straight in the chest. It wasn't just about one act of contact anymore. It was a pattern, a structure, a fraudulent system hiding under HOA letterhead. And it was going to fall. That afternoon, I took Lyra's tank top and mapped out the stretch pattern again, laying it over the digital stills from the video. The contact area matched the heat profile from the sensor array, the angle of her spine, the torque of Clarabeth's wrist. It all pointed to a controlled, purposeful grip. I compiled everything into one file set, time-stamped and ordered, a folder named Core Evidence. Inside it, 6 exhibits. One teenage girl's Sunday morning turned into a legal takedown operation. At sunset, I got the call. "Sheriff's going in tomorrow morning," Callan said. "She won't be expecting it. We've kept it airtight. You'll be informed as soon as the warrant's served. And the board? They'll find out the same way everyone else does, through a knock. I didn't thank her. I just said, I'll be ready. That night, Lyra left her door open for the first time in 3 days. She slept facing the hallway. I stayed on the couch with my laptop open, the porch light on, and the file folder glowing on the screen like a loaded weapon. We weren't waiting anymore. The sheriff's team met me at 6:14 a.m., sharp. 2 black cruisers, unmarked but unmistakable, rolled to a quiet stop near the community tennis court. They parked beneath the old magnolia tree, same one where Marin had tied up a welcome home banner for Lyra's first day of middle school. Now it cast long shadows across bulletproof vests and a folded warrant envelope. Deputy Marnez stepped out first. Gray hair, steady hands, voice like gravel over stone. He didn't smile, didn't need to. "You're Rhett Vellon?" he asked. "Yes." "You're our complainant and primary evidence provider?" I nodded. "Everything's ready." He handed me a copy of the warrant, freshly signed by Judge Bramley. The charge, battery of a minor, secondary clause, fraudulent use of unratified governance authority in a public jurisdiction. "Is she in her residence now?" Marnez asked. "She doesn't leave before 8. She walks the loop with a clipboard." Marnez looked to the younger officer behind him. "We'll go quiet. We'll serve soft. She pushes back. We'll harden up." I gave him a second folder with the core exhibits, printed in order, A through F, each labeled and time-stamped. He flipped through them with the practiced speed of someone used to sifting real from nonsense. When he reached Torrin's memo and the audio transcript, he stopped, pressed his lips together, and gave a faint nod. "That'll do it." I watched as they moved down the sidewalk. No lights, no cuffs drawn, no sirens. Just 3 officers, 1 folded envelope, and the weight of the law behind each step. At 6:38 a.m., they knocked on Clara Beth's door. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw her face through the window, saw her mouth open, eyebrows lift, eyes dart toward the mailbox. She was still in a bathrobe, hair half pinned. She didn't slam the door. She didn't shout. She just stared at the paper in her hands like it had written itself. Marnez handed her a second envelope, Callan's protective order. It barred her from initiating contact with Lyra, myself, or any board proceedings until the investigation concluded. At 6:42 a.m., they walked her back inside. No cuffs. Just the cold understanding that whatever power she thought she held was now under formal review. At 6:44 a.m., I walked back home. Lyra was awake, sitting at the kitchen table in her oversized hoodie, cereal untouched. "You look like something happened," she said softly. "It did," I said. "She's been served." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly, she exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. "You didn't yell," she said. "You didn't go to the board. You didn't argue. I built the case," I said. "That's louder." She gave a small nod and looked down at her cereal. "They'll talk about me at school," she whispered. "They might." "I don't want to be the story." "You won't be," I said. "She will." That afternoon, I received an email from the HOA board, a single-line notice. Clara Beth Norrell has been placed on administrative suspension pending legal review. No apology, no explanation. Just a clean erasure of her presence. Like they'd known this was coming and hoped no one would look deeper. But it was too late for that. By 3 p.m., Torrin forwarded a memo that had started circulating internally, members calling for a vote to audit all enforcement citations issued over the last 5 years. The phrase retroactive invalidation appeared more than once, and with it, something new. Signatures, parents, residents. People I'd never spoken to. People who'd stayed quiet, just like Torrin, until someone made the first crack. The system she built was finally creaking. I spent the evening organizing the files one last time, not for court, not for evidence, just for myself. I labeled the master folder Clara Beth Norrell Fallout and locked it in my backup drive. Lyra went to bed early, no headphones, no hoodie, just the silence of safety returning, and I sat at the edge of the porch as the streetlights came on, watching the path where Clara Beth once walked each morning, clipboard in hand. There was no one there now, and that emptiness felt right. The email landed at 7:12 a.m. Subject, urgent, board special session called Redberry Glade HOA. It was brief, 2 sentences, no flair. In light of recent developments, the board will hold a special session this evening at 5:30 p.m. in the clubhouse meeting room. Attendance is open to all residents. No mention of Clarabeth, no reference to charges, just a desperate attempt to regain control of a narrative that had already slipped through their fingers. By 8 spa, word had spread across the neighborhood. The bulletin board was stripped clean, every flyer, notice, and printed policy removed. Even the tack holes had been wiped down. A paper towel still hung from one of the pins like it gave up halfway through. I walked the loop in silence, counting how many front porches had neighbors huddled in whisper. At least 9. Whatever illusion of order Clarabeth had enforced, it cracked in public, and tonight it would shatter. By noon, I finished assembling the full presentation. Callan had advised me to stay civilian. No formal address, no legal posturing. Just truth, methodically delivered. The goal wasn't a lawsuit. The goal was structural collapse. I prepared a binder, not digital, not flashy. Just printed pages, photos, policy drafts, timestamps, quotes, and signatures. Exhibit A, still frame of Clarabeth's contact with Lyra. Exhibit B, the false resolution, 3B draft. Exhibit C, the dress code bulletin. Exhibit D, Torrens signed testimony. Exhibit E, board memo from 2016 rejecting the policy. Exhibit F, Clarabeth's own words in the recording justifying its use. At the front of the binder, I clipped a copy of the signed warrant. Let them ignore it in front of a room full of parents. At 4:45, I ironed my shirt, tucked the folder under my arm, and walked with Lyra down to the clubhouse. She didn't ask to stay home. She didn't hide behind her hoodie. She wore a plain zip-up sweatshirt, hair tied, back, earbuds dangling from her wrist like she didn't need them anymore. She stood taller now. There were already people gathering by the front doors, maybe 20. More cars pulling in. Lawn chairs being carried down sidewalks. I spotted Torrens standing off to the side, no clipboard this time, hands in his jacket pockets. The meeting room filled fast. 5 of the 7 board members were seated at the front table, clearly tense. Mrs. Hargrove, the treasurer, kept glancing at the empty seat beside her, the one that used to belong to Clarabeth. When the clock struck 5:30, the room fell quiet. Then a voice called out from the back, sharp and clear. "Where's Clarabeth?" No one at the table answered, so I stepped forward. "Clarabeth Norell is under investigation for battery and policy fraud," I said, holding up the folder. "She's been served by the sheriff's department. The board has known about this for 24 hours. Gasps broke out. A few chairs scraped backward. Someone whispered, "That's why she didn't walk this morning." I kept my voice steady. "For those who don't know me, I'm Rhett Vellon. My daughter Lyra was assaulted by Clarabeth during one of her so-called dress code spot checks. That phrase doesn't exist in any legal HOA policy, and neither does the rule she used to justify grabbing a minor." Mrs. Hargrove stood abruptly. "Mr. Vellon, this isn't—" I raised the folder. "This," I said, flipping it open, "is everything. The footage, the fabricated policy, witness testimony, a board memo confirming 3B was never passed, and a signed warrant approved by Judge Bramley. Every resident here has a right to see what was done in their name." I stepped forward and placed the binder on the table. Then I looked around the room. Faces once passive were now fierce. "I'm not here to speak for revenge," I said. "I'm here to ask this board why it allowed Clarabeth to rule by fear, why no one asked where her authority came from, and how many others were fined, harassed, or touched because no one thought to ask if the rule existed." Silence. Then someone clapped, then 2 more, and then the room filled with it. Not applause for me, but for the fact that someone finally dragged the lights on and left the door open. Clarabeth was nowhere in sight when I arrived at the clubhouse the next morning. Her nameplate was gone too. Removed from the boardroom table, even the adhesive residue wiped clean. In its place sat a small placard that read, "Interim Compliance Review Pending." Whatever hold she had on this place, it had evaporated overnight. But the meeting hadn't ended with applause. That part only happened on the surface. Underneath it, I'd seen it in their eyes. Half the room relieved, the other half rattled. Not because they disagreed with me, but because they were used to order, even bad order. Clarabeth had given them a structure to lean on, and now I'd knocked it over. The rest of the board had adjourned in silence. No one dared challenge the contents of the binder, not with 20 witnesses and a judge-signed warrant staring them down. But they hadn't endorsed me either. They'd simply said the investigation would proceed and that resident input would be reviewed, which meant one thing: this wasn't over. That afternoon, I got the message I was waiting for. Callan, media's picking it up. News 8 confirmed they've seen the complaint. They're sending a crew tomorrow. I didn't smile when I read it. This wasn't victory, not yet. But it was momentum. And momentum in a place like Redberry Glade. That was enough to start turning gears that hadn't moved in years. Around 3 p.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. I opened the door before they knocked. It was Torrin again. He looked different this time. Shirt pressed, eyes steady. "She's trying to get back in," he said. "Clarabeth?" He nodded. "Filed a petition this morning. Claimed the board overstepped by suspending her without a full vote. Says the charges are under review and don't constitute official removal." I laughed once, short and dry. "She's trying to bury the body before the autopsy starts. She wants to speak at the next open board meeting, the one she's calling herself." My pulse ticked upward. "She doesn't have the authority," I said. "She's betting no one will challenge her." He handed me a folded paper, an internal email CC'd to several board members. It was signed by her, Clarabeth Norell, still using the title Enforcement Chair, Redberry Glade HOA. She was claiming that Callan's complaint was politically motivated, that I had coerced Torrin's testimony, and that Lyra's footage had been selectively edited. "She's panicking," I said. "She's dangerous when she panics." "Let her speak," I said finally. "Let her come." Torrin looked at me. "You sure?" "I'm done building my case. It's time the rest of the community saw who she really is, unfiltered, in full daylight." That night, I gathered every piece of evidence again. Not for court, for the room. I printed large photo boards, Clarabeth's hand mid-grab, the blinking node light behind her, the fake policy draft with her handwriting, the time-stamped bulletin with no ratification record. I mounted them on foam boards, old-school courtroom style. Lyra helped me glue them. Her hands were steadier than mine. "She's not going to apologize, is she?" she asked. "No," I said, "but she's going to be outnumbered." I wasn't just bringing evidence this time. I was bringing witnesses. By midnight, I'd contacted 11 neighbors, 7 parents, 4 teens. All had stories. Some had written statements. Some were ready to speak. None had ever dared before. Clarabeth had built her kingdom on silence. We were about to burn it down with voices. The next board meeting was officially listed for the following Thursday. But unofficially, it had already started. The meeting room couldn't hold everyone. By the time I arrived with Lyra, every chair was taken. Neighbors stood along the back wall, crowding into the doorway, spilling into the hallway outside. Someone had propped open the side exit for ventilation, but it didn't help much. The air buzzed, not from temperature, but from tension. And anticipation. Clarabeth sat at the front table. She wore a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and that same thin-lipped smile she always used when issuing citations. The seat beside her was empty. The other board members sat 3 feet away, clustered at the opposite end, like she was radioactive. On the table in front of her was a manila folder labeled Rebuttal Notes. She stood before anyone introduced her. No permission, no preamble. "I'd like to begin," she said, raising her voice just loud enough to command attention. She didn't acknowledge the crowd, didn't nod to the board, didn't look at Lyra. She spoke like she still owned the room. "There has been a great deal of misinformation circulating this community," she said. "I was accused, wrongly, of acting without authority. I want to clarify that the resolution in question, 3B, was drafted with full historical precedent, based on prior enforcement practices that were never officially revoked." There it was. That was her anchor. History as justification, behavior as permission. "And while there may be paperwork inconsistencies," she continued, "that is not equivalent to criminal behavior. I have served this board and this community for over 8 years. I care about our children, our image, our standards, and I have never acted outside the spirit of our bylaws." She flipped her folder open, removed a single page, and held it aloft. "This," she said, "is a letter from one of our original board founders confirming that visual verification has been an accepted compliance tool since 2014. Murmurs rippled through the room. I stepped forward and raised my hand. The board chair, an older man named Reuben Clay, newly returned to active role, nodded once. "You have the floor, Mr. Vellon." I walked up slowly, holding a single enlarged still frame, the image. Clarabeth's hand grasping the back of Lyra's tank strap, her fingers mid-pinch, the child's spine arched in recoil. I turned it toward the room. "This is what she calls visual verification," I said. "This is what she just claimed was tradition." Gasps. Audible now. No one was whispering anymore. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. She didn't ask my daughter for consent. She didn't explain a violation. She didn't cite a valid rule. She reached out, laid hands on a minor, and took a photo. Clarabeth opened her mouth, but I raised the second board. Torrens' signed statement, scanned and blown up, with his signature in the thick black ink. "This is the Compliance Archivist's record," I said. "Resolution 3B was rejected in 2016. It never passed. It was blacklined by board vote. No quorum, no ratification, and no legal standing." I turned to the board. "You all knew this, didn't you?" Reuben looked down. One woman to his left nodded slowly, and then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. "My daughter was stopped at the mailbox," a woman said, stepping forward. Clarabeth told her the inseam of her shorts was too short. She was 13. "She told my son he was sagging and threatened to fine us for indecency," a father said from the hallway. "I have 3 notices at home," someone else added, "all signed by her, all for things that aren't even in the handbook." The room cracked open. One after another, they came forward. Stories, incidents, fragments of a pattern, every one of them tied to the same playbook. No vote, no rules, just Clarabeth's voice, a clipboard, and conviction. And then Torrens stepped forward. "She told me to print those drafts," he said, loud enough to reach the windows. "Told me they'd been passed. I believed her, until I checked. And when I told her what I found, she said to keep my mouth shut or I'd lose my contract." Clarabeth stood now, red-faced but not trembling. "You're all turning on me?" she snapped. "After everything I've done for this neighborhood?" Reuben stood too. "No," he said calmly. "We're turning the lights on." They voted her out. It didn't happen with shouting or protests or slammed fists on tables. It happened quietly, almost clinically, after the meeting ended, and the board reconvened behind closed doors for a final review. 42 minutes later, they returned, papers in hand, and Reuben Clay stood before the same crowd that had gathered night after night to watch the walls finally crack. "Effective immediately," he said. "Clarabeth Norell is removed from her position as enforcement chair. Her access to HOA systems, databases, and correspondence is revoked. A full third-party audit of all enforcement citations issued under her supervision is already underway." No applause this time, just silence. That kind of silence you get when something breaks and stays broken just long enough for air to get in. Clarabeth didn't speak. She didn't protest. She didn't even make eye contact with anyone. She rose from her seat, picked up her folder, and walked straight through the crowd like she didn't recognize a single face. She didn't look at Lyra. She didn't look at me. And that was the last time Redberry Glade saw her in an official capacity. By the following morning, the HOA site listed a compliance hold pending policy review. Notices were gone, spot checks suspended indefinitely. Even the smart safety poles were disconnected at the root node. The blinking lights stopped cold. 3 days later, I walked down to the reflection steps with Lyra. She brought sidewalk chalk, bright colors, purple, green, and blue. We didn't say anything on the walk there, just the wind whispering through the trees, the same bend in the path where Clarabeth had stood. But the steps looked different now. Someone had cleaned them, not just wiped them down, scrubbed them. Fresh sealant glinted in the light. Flowers had been placed on the bench, Marin's bench. Lyra crouched and started to draw. I stood back and let her fill the steps with soft lines and words. "You are safe here," one of them read. Another, "We see you." When she finished, she stepped back, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You think she's gone for good?" she asked. "Clarabeth?" She nodded. "She's not coming back," I said. "And if she tries, this neighborhood won't forget." Lyra looked out at the pond, arms crossed. "People always say that, but they do forget, or pretend nothing happened." I knelt beside her, touched the chalk-dusted edge of the bench. That's why we draw, I said. So there's something they can't erase. Later that week, the board approved a motion to rename the reflection steps. A resident vote passed it unanimously. It's called Lyra Circle now. Not a memorial, not a punishment, a marker of where it happened and where it stopped. The board has since adopted new rules, actual voted-on policy that includes age-based boundaries, consent protections, and external oversight. Nothing perfect, but something real. Torrin stayed on. He volunteers now at youth events, makes sure the printer in the back office only prints what the board signs. People started waving again. The silence didn't vanish overnight. Some neighbors still cross the street when they see us coming. Others nod but avoid eye contact. But some, more and more, each week, stop to say thank you. Or ask about Lyra. Or bring us muffins quietly and leave them at the door. The power Clarabeth held, it was never legal. It was cultural. It fed on silence, on shame, on the hope that no one would ever call it what it really was. But we did, and the record holds. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.